The first slap of cold morning air hit me on the 40th floor before the espresso machine even finished its cycle. Because Desmond Cray had already thrown my report across the conference table, and it slid off the glass edge and onto the floor at my feet. "Explain to me," he said, "why a filing clerk with a stutter thinks she can flag a 9-figure shipping account." I wasn't a filing clerk. I was a forensic auditor, 3 years into a job that paid me like a filing clerk, and I didn't stutter unless 12 executives were staring at me like I'd wandered in from the wrong building. I bent down and picked up my own work off the carpet while 11 people watched me do it. Nobody moved to help. That was the point. In a room like that, watching someone be small was its own kind of entertainment, and I had been the entertainment for 3 years running. I told myself I didn't need this room. I had somewhere warmer to be at 11 that night, in a chat window with a woman whose name I didn't know, who called herself Northbound, and who had never once made me feel like something to be stepped over. Before I tell you what happened next, I want to ask something small of you. If stories like this one, about being overlooked until the one person who matters finally sees you, are the kind of thing that keeps you up past midnight the way they keep me up, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. It costs nothing, and it means everything to a story like this one finding its way to more people who need it. Now, back into the cold with Ren. Because that's my name. Ren Calloway, 26, Omega, unbonded, 3 months into a habit I couldn't quit, even though I'd never seen the other person's face. Firelight matched strangers by scent questionnaire and let them talk for as long as they wanted without a photo ever loading. I'd told Northbound things I hadn't told my own sister. That I drank chamomile tea with too much honey because my mother used to make it that way before she died. That I hadn't taken an elevator in 11 years. Not since one stalled with me in it during a blackout when I was 15, the dark folding in until I couldn't remember which wall was which. That I wanted, more than anything reasonable, to see the northern lights before I ran out of time to want things. Northbound had answered that last one at 2 in the morning with 6 words. "If you're ever lost, message me. I'll point you back." I'd read it so many times the phone screen had a faint oil smudge over that exact line. Desmond wasn't finished. He straightened his cuffs, glanced around the table for an audience, and found one. This company does not run on gut feelings from junior staff who can't hold eye contact. "Miss Calloway, gather your notes and get back to your desk before I have you gather them permanently." That was when the door opened without a knock, and the temperature in the room actually seemed to drop, the way it did whenever Rowan Farrow walked into a space she hadn't asked to be let into. I had reported to her every morning for 4 months, a 15-minute briefing at 6 a.m. Before the building woke up, and in 4 months she had never once asked me how I was, never once smiled, never once given me anything to work with except clipped questions and a stare that made me feel examined down to the bone. The press called her the Glacier of Farrow Tower. I had started to believe the name fit her better than her own. She didn't look at Desmond. She looked at the report still trembling slightly in my hands. "Read me the account number you flagged," she said. My voice came out steadier than I expected. I read it. She asked for the discrepancy, the exact dollar figure, the date range. I gave her all 3 without checking my notes, because I'd built that anomaly by hand over 6 sleepless nights, and I knew it the way you know your own address. "Pull the full audit trail," Rowan said, still to me, still not to Desmond. "You have my office by end of day." Desmond's mouth opened and shut once, like a man who had rehearsed a different ending to this scene. Rowan finally turned to him, and whatever was in her face made him sit back down without another word. Then she left the room the same way she'd entered it, no wasted motion, no glance back, and I stood there holding a report that had gone, in the space of 90 seconds, from garbage to the most important document in the building. That night I told Northbound about it, typing fast, my hands still not quite steady. I said the CEO had defended me in front of everyone and I didn't understand why, that she'd never so much as asked my name before today. Northbound was quiet for a long minute, the little dots appearing and disappearing 3 times before an answer came. Some people don't know how to be kind out loud. They only know how to be kind with their hands full of consequences. I read that twice and felt something in my chest tilt sideways, though I couldn't have told you why. By the second morning, I understood why Rowan had wanted the audit trail. My anomaly wasn't an anomaly. It was a thread, and when I pulled it, an entire shell structure unspooled underneath 3 of Faro Global's largest shipping contracts, money bleeding out through accounts that existed on paper and nowhere else. I hadn't found a mistake. I'd found a wound. Rowan called me up to the 40th floor personally instead of routing it through 6 layers of assistance, which alone was enough to make the entire executive suite stop typing when I walked past. Her office had floor-to-ceiling glass and almost nothing else. No photographs, no clutter. A room built by someone who had decided a long time ago that softness was a liability she couldn't afford. "You built this alone," she said. "Not a question." "Nobody else believed the numbers," I said. "I thought if I was wrong, I'd rather be wrong quietly." Something crossed her face too fast to name. "You weren't wrong." She slid a folder across the desk. "As of this morning, you report directly to me, not to Cray, not to anyone below me. If he asks why, tell him I said so." I should have felt triumphant. Mostly, I felt like I'd been picked up by a storm and set down somewhere I didn't yet have footing. When I left her office, her assistant handed me a cup of tea I hadn't ordered. Chamomile. Too much honey. I stood in the hallway holding it, staring at the steam, telling myself it was a common enough drink, that plenty of people liked their tea too sweet, that this meant nothing at all. That evening, riding the elevator down 12 floors because I'd forgotten there was another way, and the stairwell door had been locked for maintenance, I caught, underneath the recycled air and the cologne of a dozen strangers who'd used the car that day, one clean thread of something dark and cold, vetiver laid over gunmetal, the kind of scent that didn't apologize for itself. It was gone before I could place where I'd smelled it before. I told myself it belonged to someone in facilities. I did not tell Northbound about the tea, or the smell, or the folder that now sat open on my new desk on the 40th floor with my name typed at the top of it. Some part of me, the part that had learned early to distrust anything that felt too much like being chosen, was already flinching from the shape of a question I wasn't ready to ask. The 40th floor smelled like money the way the rest of the building smelled like burnt coffee, and for the first 2 weeks I moved through it like I'd wandered backstage during someone else's play. My new desk sat outside Rowan's office, close enough that I heard the particular silence she kept around her, the way other people kept dogs. Her assistant, a sharp-jawed beta named Priya who ran security and half the building besides, looked at me the first morning like she was recalculating something. 15 years I've worked for that woman, Priya said, setting down a stack of files without ceremony. I have never once seen her wait for a report instead of demanding it be sent up. You waited 11 minutes yesterday finishing a call, and she didn't say a word. Just sat there. Waiting, she studied me the way you'd study a locked door someone had left ajar. Don't waste it. I didn't know what I'd done to earn that kind of patience, but proof of it kept arriving in small, specific pieces I couldn't explain away. My chair had been replaced with one that didn't aggravate the old shoulder injury I'd mentioned exactly once, in passing, to no one on this floor. The break room started stocking the odd little ginger biscuits I liked, and nobody else touched. Twice now, when the elevator bank showed a queue, Rowan had simply turned and taken the stairs instead, saying nothing about it. Only glancing back once to make sure I was following, and both times my chest had gone tight with something too close to recognition to be comfortable. Downstairs, the other analysts had started calling me the invoice mouse, who'd gotten lucky, which stung less than it used to, mostly because I was too busy staring at 11 years of shipping manifests to care what they called me. Desmond Cray had not disappeared. He'd gone quiet instead, which was worse, the quiet of a man rearranging his alibi. Twice I caught him watching me from across the atrium with an expression that had nothing warm in it at all. He cornered me by the mailroom on a Thursday, close enough that I had to plant my feet to keep from stepping back. "You think loyalty from a woman like Pharaoh lasts," he said, low, almost gentle, which made it worse. "It doesn't. She burns through favorites the way she burns through everything. Walk your little audit back to a footnote, Calloway, and I'll forget you ever opened that file." "I don't forget numbers," I said. "It's the one thing I'm good at." His jaw worked. "Then, I hope you're good at looking for new work, too." That night, I sat cross-legged on my kitchen floor because my apartment didn't have a couch worth sitting on, and told Northbound everything except the threat, because some fears felt too heavy to hand to a stranger, even a kind one. I told her instead about the chair, the biscuits, the stairs. "It's like she already knows the shape of me," I typed. "Like she's been paying attention longer than she's let on." "Maybe she has," Northbound wrote back. "Maybe some people watch longer than they speak." There was something in the rhythm of it, the particular economy of her sentences, short declaratives stacked like bricks that snagged at a memory I couldn't quite land. I set the phone down and made myself a cup of chamomile with too much honey, and didn't let myself finish the thought. 2 days later, Rowan asked me to stay late to walk her personally through the shell account structure before the board meeting, and the whole executive floor emptied out around us until it was just the two of us and 40 floors of city light spread out past the glass like something spilled and glittering. She stood closer than she needed to, looking at the screen, and when she reached past me to scroll the page, her sleeve brushed my wrist, and I felt it travel up my arm like a current. "You built all of this from a stutter and a gut feeling," she said, not looking away from the numbers. "Cray called you defective in that meeting. I heard him from the hallway. I know. He's wrong." She finally turned, and there was something unguarded in her face for exactly as long as it took her to say it. "You're the only person on this floor who's told me the truth in 4 months without being asked twice." I didn't trust myself to answer that. My phone buzzed once, face down on the desk between us, Northbound's name flashing along the edge of the screen before the display went dark again, and Rowan's eyes flicked to it and then to me with something unreadable moving behind them. "You should answer that," she said, quieter now. "It can wait. Some things shouldn't." She stepped back, the moment closing itself like a door I hadn't finished walking through. "Send me the full file by Monday." And Wren, it was the first time she'd used my name instead of my last one, and it landed somewhere under my ribs. "Watch Cray. Men like him don't threaten people they aren't afraid of." I went home that night with my skin still humming where her sleeve had touched it, and I did not open the message waiting for me until I was under my own blankets, safe, alone, unwatched. It was 3 words. "I miss you." I typed back that I missed her too before I let myself think about how strange it was to miss someone I'd never once seen. The blackout hit on a Tuesday at 9:52 p.m., the whole 40th floor going dark in one long exhale, emergency lighting bleeding red along the baseboards, while somewhere below an entire city block of power drained out at once. I was still at my desk finishing the board file Rowan had asked for, and my first thought wasn't fear. It was the elevator, the memory of being 15 and trapped and unable to find the wall, my pulse already climbing before the backup lights had finished stuttering on. Rowan's door opened. "Ren, I'm fine," I said, which was a lie my voice didn't sell well. "You're not." She crossed the room and stopped an arm's length away, closer than she'd ever stood without a reason, and something in her posture had gone careful, deliberate, the way you'd move around something you didn't want to startle. "Breathe with me." 4 counts in. I did, because there was nothing else to do with the fear except hand it somewhere. My phone was still lit on the desk behind her, the screen glowing faintly through the dark, a message thread open where I'd been mid-sentence to Northbound when the power died, and then hers lit too, buzzing once on her desk through the open door, close enough that in the red emergency light I could read the notification banner clean across the room. "Northbound, are you safe? The power's out on your side of the grid too." I looked at her phone. I looked at mine. I looked at her face, which had gone very still, the particular stillness of someone who has just watched a door swing open that they spent months bracing shut. "You're northbound," I said, and it wasn't a question, and my voice cracked right down the middle of it. She didn't lie. That was, I would think later, the first thing I ever really knew about her for certain. She didn't lie. Not even when a lie would have been so much easier. "Yes, you've been reading everything I ever told you. My mother's tea, the elevator, the lights I want to see before I die. You've been sitting across from me every morning for 4 months knowing all of it, and I didn't know your face. I know how that sounds. Tell me how it's supposed to sound different." Her jaw tightened, and for a moment I watched the Glacier of Faro Tower actually search for words, which I would learn later was rarer than snow in July. I made that account 2 years ago, after my mother died and left me a company full of people who only ever wanted something from me. I didn't want to be Rowan Farrow to one more person. I wanted, for an hour a night, to just be someone a stranger might actually choose. Her voice roughened at the edges. Then the stranger turned out to work 3 doors down from my office, and I told myself I'd say something, and every day I didn't, it got harder to imagine how. "You let me fall for you twice," I said, and only told me about one of them. "I know." I turned and walked out into the dark stairwell, rather than wait for the elevator, taking the stairs 2 at a time until my legs burned, and I didn't look back to see if she'd followed. Because some part of me needed, just once, to be the one who left first. I didn't answer Northbound's messages for 4 days. I told myself it was anger. It was also, if I was honest with the version of myself that only came out at 3 a.m, grief, for a version of her I'd built in my head who didn't have a company, a boardroom, or a reason to have hidden anything at all. Dee Marsh, who ran the records room 2 floors below mine, and had been the only person in this building to treat me like a person before any of this started, found me crying into a vending machine sandwich on day 3 and didn't ask a single question before sliding into the seat across from me. "You don't have to tell me," she said, "but if the glacier made you cry, I need to know if I'm supposed to be plotting something." "She's not what I thought," I said. "She's worse. She's exactly what I thought. And also the person I've been falling for online for 3 months, and I don't know how to hold both of those true at the same time." Dee whistled low. "Well, at least the sex would be convenient." I laughed despite myself, wet and startled, and it was the first time in 4 days my chest hadn't felt like it was being wrung out. That was the day Desmond Cray made his move. Priya found me first, badge and all, waiting outside the records room with 2 building security officers I didn't recognize and a face carved out of granite. "Your access has been suspended pending an internal investigation," she said, and I heard the apology buried under the procedure, the way her jaw worked before she said the rest. Cray filed a formal complaint this morning. He's alleging the Shell account discrepancies you flagged were fabricated by you to cover diverted funds of your own. He has documentation. Fabricated, but documentation. That's insane, I said, my voice climbing. I found his fraud. He's trying to bury it under mine. I know, Priya said, low enough the guards behind her wouldn't hear it. This is bigger than a memo, Ren. He's not just protecting himself anymore. He's making sure that if he goes down, you go down first and louder so nobody looks past you at him. They walked me to the lobby with my badge in an envelope and my personal effects in a box I hadn't asked for, past the same coworkers who used to whisper invoice mouse, all of them silent now, watching. And I understood with total clarity that being seen wasn't always the same thing as being safe. I didn't message Northbound that night. I didn't message anyone. I sat in my dark apartment with my father's old brass compass in my palm, the needle long since stuck at a heading that didn't mean anything anymore, and turned it over and over until my thumb ached. The knock came at 11:40. I almost didn't answer it. When I did, Rowan Farrow was standing in my hallway in a coat that hadn't been buttoned right, out of breath in a way I'd never once seen her. Not in a boardroom, not during the blackout, not ever. Cray's men went to your building's parking structure an hour ago, she said. Looking for your car, your laptop, anything they could plant evidence in before the investigation officially opens tomorrow. I had Priya intercept them, but I need you to come with me tonight. Not because I'm your employer. Because I am not letting him touch you. I should have argued. Some stubborn, wounded part of me wanted to. Instead, I found myself reaching for my coat, my compass still warm in my fist, and asking the only question that actually mattered right then. Is this Rowan asking, or Northbound? Both, she said. There was never a version of me that wasn't both. I should have told you that the first week. I let her drive me to the penthouse instead of a hotel, because some animal part of me trusted her scent, vetiver and gunmetal, unmistakable now, undeniable, threaded through the car's cold leather, more than I trusted my own judgment. Her apartment was as sparse as her office, glass and steel and almost nothing personal. Except for one shelf near the window that held, of all things, a child's drawing in a cheap frame curling at the edges. My sister made that, she said, following my gaze. Before the company ate her whole life the way it's eating mine. She lives in Portugal now, doesn't answer my calls unless it's her birthday. Rowan sat heavily on the arm of the couch, uncharacteristically loose-limbed, the coat still crooked on her shoulders. My mother built Faro Global out of nothing and then let it build her right back, until the only lesson she ever taught me was that trust is the tax fools pay. Her business partner of 20 years cleaned out half the company's reserves the year before she died, and she never recovered from believing someone that completely. I promised myself I'd never make her mistake. Her eyes found mine. Then I found a stranger on an app who talked to me like I was a person and not an asset, and I broke my own rule inside of 3 weeks. I sat down beside her, close enough to feel the warmth coming off her skin. I told a stranger about my mother's tea because it was easier than telling anyone I actually knew, I said. I told you about the elevator because you were safe precisely because you were nobody. Finding out you were somebody didn't just scare me. It felt like losing the one place I'd built where nobody could hurt me. I would never use anything you told me against you. Her voice had gone rough. I have spent 4 months terrified that if I told you the truth, You'd see the company, and the name, and the ice they write about in the papers, and you'd never let yourself see me again. I'm looking right at you, I said. I haven't stopped. She reached up, slow, giving me every chance to move away, her fingers stopping just short of my jaw. Tell me to stop, and I will. Don't stop, I said, and meant it with everything left in my chest. She kissed me like a woman setting down a weight she'd been carrying so long she'd forgotten what her hands were for without it, careful at first, and then not. And somewhere in the space between one breath and the next, I stopped being able to tell where the ache of the last 4 days ended and this began. When we finally broke apart, she pressed her forehead to mine, both of us breathing like we'd run somewhere together. I am going to end him, she said quietly. Legally, publicly, completely. But I need you beside me to do it. Because you're the only person in this building who ever told him no and meant it. Then let's finish what I started, I said, and for the first time since the elevator door had opened on a dark, red-lit floor, I felt something that wasn't fear at all. The story broke 3 mornings later, and it broke wrong, the way stories engineered by men like Desmond Cray always break wrong on purpose. Financial analyst accused of embezzlement scheme, alleged affair with CEO raises conflict of interest questions. My photo, badge issued and unflattering, sat beside a headline that turned 4 months of quiet cruelty into a punchline for strangers with nothing better to do than repeat it. The board convened an emergency session by 9. I wasn't in the room, but Priya was, and she told me afterward, jaw tight, that Desmond had stood up in front of 11 directors and painted a picture of a desperate junior employee who'd manufactured fraud allegations to cover her own theft and then seduced the CEO to buy herself protection. He had documents. Doctored, backdated, convincing enough that 3 board members who owed their seats to his old allies started nodding along before anyone thought to ask who'd handed him the paper trail in the first place. Rowan had to sit through all of it with her hands flat on the table and her face arranged into the exact stillness the press had named her for, because the moment she defended me too loudly, too personally, she handed the board proof of the very conflict of interest Desmond was accusing her of. I understood that, later, when she explained it to me in a hallway with her voice shaking under the calm. In the moment, all I knew was that security walked me out of the building at noon in front of the same coworkers who had watched me carry my own dropped report off the carpet 4 months earlier, and this time nobody even pretended not to stare. Effective immediately, pending investigation, the compliance officer said, not unkindly, handing me a box I recognized as the same one from before, refilled with the same handful of things that made a desk feel like it had ever been mine. My chair. My ginger biscuits, unopened, going stale in a drawer somewhere above me. My father's compass, the one thing I made sure to hold rather than pack. Dee walked me to the curb, furious in the specific silent way she got when she was too angry to be funny. "This is insane," she said. "You found his fraud. You're the reason any of this is unraveling, and he's turned it into you being the villain. That's the whole design," I said, staring up at 40 floors of glass I might never walk back into. Make the person who told the truth look like the liar. It works because everyone would rather believe the ugly, simple story than the complicated true one. I didn't hear from Rowan that whole day. Not a call. Not a message. I told myself it was strategy, that she was fighting a war I couldn't see from the sidewalk, and some smaller, more frightened part of me remembered Desmond's voice in the mailroom, telling me loyalty from a woman like her never lasted, and I hated how loud that memory got in the silence. That night, I sat on my kitchen floor with the compass in my lap and watched the needle drift, uselessly, in no direction at all, and let myself cry the way I hadn't let myself cry since the funeral it had come from. I did not know then that 4 floors above the lobby I'd been walked out of, Rowan Farrow was sitting alone in her glass office at midnight with every light off, going through 11 years of shipping manifests by hand, cross-referencing every number I'd ever flagged against a set of documents Priya had smuggled out of Desmond Cray's own locked archive, building, line by line, in the dark, the case that would bring him down. I only knew that my phone stayed silent, and that silence, for one full night, felt like the worst thing that had happened to me all week. I got the message at 6:14 the next morning. Not from Northbound, from Priya. Come to the tower. Bring the compass. I didn't ask why she knew about the compass. I got dressed and went, because some instinct older than my fear told me this was the morning everything either broke completely or came back together, and I would rather be standing up when it happened. Dee met me in her ancient records room hoodie with a flash drive clutched like a grenade pin. I pulled everything, she said, breathless. Every backup Desmond thought he'd wiped, every shell transfer, every timestamp. It took me 18 hours, and I only found the last piece an hour ago. She held it out to me like an offering. You built the map. I just found where he buried the bodies. We laid it out together on my kitchen table before dawn, cross-referencing her recovered files against my own 6 months of notes, and the picture that emerged wasn't just fraud. It was a decade of it, funneled through the exact category of shell account structure that had ruined Rowan's mother 20 years earlier. Run in part by 2 of the same old guard associates who had protected Desmond's rise inside the company ever since. He hadn't invented a new scheme. He'd inherited one from the very partner who'd broken Vivienne Farrow and passed it down like a family trade. I called Priya with the finding and heard her go very quiet on the other end of the line. She needs to see this before the board reconvenes at 9, she said. Bring it yourself. She'd want it to be you. Farrow Tower's lobby had gone strange and electric when I arrived, security tighter than usual, a cluster of reporters already forming outside with cameras aimed at the revolving doors like they expected a body to be carried out. Priya met me at the elevator bank, took one look at my face, and steered me toward the stairwell instead without either of us saying a word about why. Rowan was in the boardroom when I found her, and she looked like she hadn't slept, hollow around the eyes, her tie slightly crooked in a way I'd never once seen her allow. Desmond was already there too, flanked by 2 of the old guard directors, smiling the confident smile of a man who believed the story he'd built would hold. Miss Calloway, he said, feigning surprise, brave of you to show your face. Braver than hiding 20 years of theft behind someone else's name, I said, and set the flash drive on the table in front of the board chair. Everything's here. Every shell account, every transfer, every date, cross-referenced against the exact scheme that emptied this company's reserves before some of you were even hired. He didn't invent this fraud. He inherited it from the man who broke Vivienne Farrow, and he's been running it ever since. The room went very still. Desmond's smile didn't move, but something behind his eyes did. The first real crack I'd seen in 4 months of watching him perform certainty. This is fabricated, he said, too fast. The same tactic she used to invent her original accusation. Play it, Rowan said, and Priya set a recorder on the table, and Desmond's own voice filled the room, caught 2 nights earlier by Priya's intercepted security team, instructing one of his men to plant falsified records in my apartment before the investigation opened. Every director at that table heard him say my name, heard him call me expendable, heard him laugh about how easy it would be to make an Omega with no family connections disappear from the narrative entirely. I watched the old guard directors' faces change, one by one, as 20 years of protected reputation came apart in real time. Desmond lunged first at the recorder, and then, when Priya blocked him, at me, close enough that I smelled the sour panic under his cologne, his hand closing hard around my wrist before Rowan was across the table and between us. Taking the shove meant for me across her own shoulder instead, hard enough that she staggered into the chair behind her. "Touch her again," Rowan said, low and absolutely level, and the board will be the least of what comes for you. And something in her voice made even the security officers in the doorway go still. Desmond's face had gone gray. For one long second, I thought she might actually finish what her voice had promised, and some part of me understood, watching her, exactly how much restraint had been holding that particular door shut for years. "Don't," I said quietly, "let the law take him. Not you. I don't want the woman I love to become the story he tried to make her into." She looked at me, breathing hard, and I watched her choose, deliberately, to step back. Security had Desmond in handcuffs before the reporters outside even knew what had happened, escorted him past the same glass lobby where I'd once carried my dropped report off the carpet in front of 11 silent witnesses. This time, it was his walk everyone watched, his name the papers would carry by evening, the sneering executives who'd once called me an invoice mouse now standing in stunned little clusters, unable to meet my eyes. The board reinstated me before noon, unanimously, one of them actually apologizing out loud, which felt stranger than anything else that had happened all week. Rowan stood at the head of the same table where I'd once been humiliated and told the assembled directors, in front of everyone, exactly what I'd meant to the case, to the company, and in words I hadn't expected her to say in a boardroom at all, to her. "I built a wall around myself for so long I forgot it was a wall," she said. "She's the only person who ever climbed it without asking my permission first, and I am done pretending I don't want her standing on this side of it with me." That evening, alone in her penthouse with the city gone soft and gold outside the glass, she knelt in front of me with a small, unmarked box that held not a ring but a compass, brand new, its needle sure and steady, and said the words I would carry for the rest of my life. "I told you once that if you were ever lost, you could message me and I'd point you back. I want to be the one who does that in person now. For good, if you'll let me. Tell me to stop, and I will." "Don't stop," I said, laughing and crying at the same time, and when she rose and cupped my jaw and asked, low and careful, whether I wanted the mark, I said yes with my whole chest, and the bite when it came was gentle and certain, and it didn't hurt the way I'd always heard it would. It felt like a door finally closing correctly, like the last piece of a lock clicking home. The bond opened between us like a window thrown wide in a stuffy room, and for the first time in my life I could feel, faint and warm at the very edge of myself, that I was not the only one who had been lonely in a crowd for years. 6 months later, Desmond Cray was sentenced to 11 years for fraud, embezzlement, and witness tampering, and the 2 directors who'd shielded him resigned within the week rather than face the ethics inquiry that followed. Faro Global's new compliance division was named, at the board's insistence, after the analyst who'd caught the whole scheme with nothing but a stutter and a gut feeling nobody wanted to believe. Priya, who did not hand out compliments the way other people handed out candy, cornered me by the elevator on my first day running that division and said, gruffly, like it cost her something, 15 years I watched that woman build walls. I have never once seen her choose someone over the company until you. Don't waste it, and then walked off before I could answer, which Dee informed me later was, from Priya, basically a wedding toast. We married in the spring, small, in the garden behind Rowan's mother's old house, which Rowan had spent the winter quietly restoring instead of selling the way she'd always planned to. Vows were short, because neither of us had ever needed many words to understand each other. Dee cried loudly enough to embarrass herself and didn't care. My compass sat on the little table beside the rings the whole ceremony, needle steady, pointing true for the first time since my father died. A year on, we stood together on a frozen ridge in the far north of Norway, bundled against a cold that didn't feel unkind for once, and watched the sky open into ribbons of green and violet exactly like the pictures I'd stared at for years and never believed I'd stand under. Rowan's arms came around me from behind, her chin resting against my temple. Her scent of vetiver and gunmetal warmed now by something new underneath it, something that smelled almost like home. "Still glad I found you," she said quietly, even knowing how badly I almost lost you doing it. "You didn't lose me," I said, watching the lights bend and fold above us. "You found me twice. Most people only get the one chance to be seen. I got two, and I kept both of them. It turns out the people who notice you least are rarely the ones worth staying for. And the ones who notice everything, the tea, the stairs, the compass with its needle stuck on nowhere, are the ones who were never really strangers at all, just waiting for the right moment to say so out loud." The end. If Ren and Rowan's story stayed with you the way it stayed with me while I was telling it, I'd love for you to subscribe to the channel so the next one finds you too. I want to know what you think in the comments. Which small detail do you think finally made Rowan certain that Ren was the one behind Candlewick 82? The tea, the stairs, or something else entirely? Write it below. I read every one of them. Thank you for spending these hours inside this story with me. Rest easy tonight, and I'll see you in the next one.